Hello everyone, my name is Vanya Pandya. I have been an early childhood educator for the past 17 years now. Currently, I am working with RBK Global School as an ECCED coordinator. I'm part of a series which the ECDF forum is going to relay on the social media platforms, and it is called EDU TALKS. And I'm really glad to be a member of ECDF and a part of this series. Thank you, ECDF. My storytelling session in preschools is for the ECDF on their EDU Talks series. Now, please allow me to share my screen. Storytelling in preschools. That's the session all about. First, the session today is storytelling in preschools. But before we start the session, let us first understand what is a story. A story is a telling of an event or events. It is a description of a journey of character or a lot of characters from the beginning to the end. The story can have events which may be factual, that is non-fictional, or imaginary, that is fictional. Now, whatever the story has, whether it is non-fictional or fictional, or whether it has one character or a lot of characters, the thing which is essential for a story is that it should have a teller or a narrator and a listener or a group of listeners. So that is what a story is. Now let us look at what is storytelling. The art of storytelling goes back thousands and thousands of years. It is ancient. Storytelling is one of the oldest forms of teaching. It is also an interactive art of using words and actions. The narrator uses words, uses actions to narrate the story to the audience. And through this narration, the narrator actually creates magic, a sense of wonder. And then the listeners or a listener, that is the audience, gets transported to an imaginary world, to the world of fairies, to the world of demons, to the world of witches, to the world of handsome princes, and to the world of beautiful and delicate princesses. That's what storytelling is all about. So are you all transported to an imaginary world? I'm sure you are. Now let's look at what are the benefits of storytelling. Why should we have storytelling as a session at all? Storytelling helps in the development of literacy skills. Now, when we are reading a story to the children, or when we are saying the story to the children, or when we are narrating a story to the children, children learn new words, children learn new vocabulary. There is a lot of literacy that is involved in telling and listening to a story. So even when the children actually learn how to write or read, they are introduced to the print through the medium of a story. The story has the power to make the children understand that a spoken word, a sound of a word, or the sound of a letter, or a written text, this everything gets translated to a written format. So this gives them a lot of confidence when they actually start reading or writing at an appropriate age. So that's where the literacy development happens, in the initial stages when we start telling the stories to them. And believe me, there is no age when you can actually start telling stories to your children. Now, the second benefit of storytelling is listening skills. Storytelling develops listening skills in the children. We are all educators and we have been dealing with pre-primary children on a regular basis. And we know it's a challenge to hold their attention for a long length of time. But when we tell a story to them, when we read a story to them, or when we narrate a story to them, we can hold their attention for a good 7 to 10 minutes. I, as a teacher, I worked as a teacher for so long, but I, as a teacher, wasn't able to hold their attention for 3 to 4 minutes at a stretch during their academic sessions. But as soon as I would start a storytelling session, they would just sit with their mouths agape and their eyes wide in wonder as to what is going to unfold in the story. So during these storytelling sessions, you know what is happening? They are enhancing their listening skills. They are enhancing their focus, which is going to be so valuable to them in their later schooling years, in their adult life also. So the storytelling session has to be a very powerful session where the children are developing their focus, where they're enhancing their focus, where they're developing and enhancing their listening skills. Now let's talk about vocabulary acquisition. And how does that happen when we tell a story to our children? When they listen to new words, that is how they add the words to their already existing repository of words. So children already know a few words or a lot of words which they hear their adults, as in like their parents or their elder siblings talking in their homes. But then when we read the stories with those new words, they add up to the already existing dictionary of words that the children have. Also, the repetitions in the story, they add to the children's vocabulary because children start relating to those repetitions and children start understanding those repetitions because they are being repeated time and again in a story. So that's how children acquire new vocabulary through a storytelling session. Now, fosters imagination. As I had mentioned earlier, when I was telling you what is a storytelling session, that stories have the power, they have the capacity of transporting children or transporting the audience to an imaginary world, to a world where the impossible is possible. Now, when they start imagining the characters, when they start imagining the plot, when they start imagining the settings, they are enhancing, they are encouraging their own creativity. Believe me, nobody is born an author. Nobody is born a writer. But it is only through the interest that they have for creativity, for imagination, through listening to stories, through reading books, that their imagination takes a wider horizon. And their imagination then means no bounds. A storytelling session would also increase the children's cultural understanding. In a fast-growing world, where the world is shrinking, as we say, it is so paramount that we have a cultural understanding of a different country, maybe, or of a different tribe. Now, this cultural understanding is brought to children in the form of a story where children can learn about different cultures, different traditions, different values. They learn about new places. So in future, as adults, they are more socially tolerant and they are more accepted, culturally. So that's what a storytelling does. It increases a child's cultural understanding, a child's understanding of different ethnicities which exist across the globe. Now, a story also helps sharpen memory. When we are reading a story to our children, or when we are narrating a story to our children, telling a story to our children, it's important that we also have a question and answer session with them at the end of the story, or maybe somewhere in the middle of the story after an important sequence. Now, how will this benefit? This will benefit because we as educators or we as adults would know how much the children have comprehended or how much the children have understood the flow of the story. It's important to understand if the children are even connected to the story. So when we ask them questions, when we encourage them to answer, we are actually sharpening their memory because we have already told them a sequence or we have already narrated the story to them. So we are also checking their retention and their recall value. So that's how, during a storytelling session, the children enhance or the children sharpen their memory because they are required to remember the characters. They are required to remember the sequence of the story. They're required to remember the flow of the story. And that's so important. Now, a story builds social skills. How can we do that through a storytelling session? When children listen to the story, if the adult is narrating a story to them and the children listen to that adult, or when the adult is reading a story from a storybook and children listen to that story, they understand that if the other person is talking, we have to be quiet. They understand the value, they understand those etiquettes and manners, and they imbibe those social skills, they imbibe those etiquettes and manners when they are interacting with their counterparts when they grow up as adults. So this is what the storytelling session does as far as their social skills are concerned. Also, a storytelling session would benefit the children in learning how to read, write, and learn. Also, it enhances their communication skills because, as I said, they're acquiring new vocabulary. They are enhancing their listening skills. And this new vocabulary that they acquire, they can use this vocabulary at the right places, at the appropriate times when they are talking to others. So this is how they build on their communication skills also. In our preschools, we normally do stories which have a moral value. So children also learn moral values and virtues through a storytelling session. So these are a few benefits of a storytelling session. Now, what makes a story effective? Don't we all want to do a story where children are invested, where children are connected, where children are with the story from the beginning to the end? For that to happen, we have to have a very strong beginning of the story. It has to be grand. The beginning is like a hook step. You know, the children should get attracted to the story right from the beginning. And that is when the children will be with the story till the end, because we have already attracted them with our beginning. Also, the story should have a very clear structure. When I say clear structure, we need to divide the stories into 3 parts: beginning, middle, and the end. So as I said, the beginning has to be very strong, very enticing. The middle has to be very effective, very, very capturing. And the end has to be very concrete. So when we end the story, you know, it should leave the children longing for more. That should be the effect of a story, of a good story. Now, a story should also be emotionally engaging. And how do we emotionally engage a child or children through a story? We can do this by actually telling them this story and connecting the story to something which they can relate to in their everyday life. Like, for example, the Little Red Riding Hood. She's a girl, so children will relate to a girl. She's going to meet her grandma. Okay, so children will relate to that sequence also, because children, they go to meet their grandparents. So that's an emotionally engaging sequence, or that's an emotionally engaging incident for the children. Also, when we are reading a story to the children, or when we are narrating a story to the children, and in a story we have, suppose, the boy's father, he drives a white car, and suddenly you remember and you say, oh, Anuj, your father also drives a white car. That is where the child's emotions come into the story, and the child is able to connect to the story in a better way. And then the entire audience connects to the story because they connect to the child, right? And how do we intellectually engage our children? So when we are telling a story to our young children, we should ask a lot of questions. We should try to engage them cognitively, the predictions. What will happen to the character? Or what is going to happen next? So that is where the children start thinking, okay? And that thinking is cognitive engagement. We can also ask the children to hypothesize, that is, ask what if questions. What if the prince is actually a demon? Or what if the witch is actually the grandmother? What is going to happen to the story then? So these kind of hypotheses give the children a chance to critically think, to comprehend, to observe. And that's the intellectual engagement that we have to throw at our children if we want to make a story effective. That is how we will keep the audience captured and captivated. So, the story should have some kind of familiarity. Now, when I say familiarity, a child should be able to connect to the characters. Like I gave you the example of Little Red Riding Hood or Goldilocks, for that matter. Goldilocks, again, was a girl who was a little naughty. So aren't we all at that age a little naughty? So that's how children will make that connection. And that is where the familiarity sets in. And the moment the familiarity sets in, the child will be able to understand the story better. Your storytelling session will be one big hit because children will also remember that story for a longer period of time because they were able to connect to that story in a larger way because they found those small familiar incidents of everyday life in that story. Now, try and keep your story very simple. Simple things are beautiful, believe me. So don't have in a lot of characters where it is confusing to the child to keep a track of what each character is doing or where each character is going. Keep a minimum of 3 or 4 characters which the young learners can follow and remember, because remember, you're going to ask them questions. So keep your characters at a bare minimum and keep your characters simple. Don't complicate them. Also keep your settings and plots very simple, very basic, because young learners need to connect to that setting and to that plot and of course to the characters. So familiarity and simplicity again would make your story a very effective story. Now we move to how do we make storytelling more effective. The most important part of doing a storytelling session is to make sure that, to bear in mind or to keep in mind that it is of personal interest of the children. As I said, the familiarity is very important for your storytelling to be very effective. You have to narrate a story, which has familiar day-to-day incidents from a child's life, or where a child can connect to that story. That connection is very important. The boy in the story rides a bike, and you should quickly connect it to the children in your class. Oh, so you too ride bikes, don't you? Just like the boy here in the story, right? Or maybe there are three friends in the story who go for swimming in the evening, and then you connect this to the children. Oh, so you also go for swimming. I know this. And then the personal interest of the children is there in the story. They start again connecting to the story. They start getting familiarized with the story, which is so important for them to be interested. Now, when you're telling a story, use props, effective, attractive, good, colorful props. Yes, they are very essential, especially for the kindergarteners. Now, the props have to be of an appropriate size that you will have to determine on the size of your audience, on the grade that you're catering to. Also, keep your props very colorful, very, very attractive, and use your props effectively. So the props should be visible to all the children. If you have a large audience, make sure that you are using large props, because even the child sitting right behind, right at the end of the entire group, should be able to see that character, should be able to see that flashcard, should be able to see that puppet. You can use a lot of puppets when you are doing story, be it a hand puppet or a stick puppet or a box puppet or a glove puppet. They love looking at these things. And then again, with those characters, with those puppets that you are using, they'll form the connection, they'll form a bonding, believe me. Now, also, these puppets go a long way. They get imbibed in a child's memory. And that is the importance of using a visual aid or using a prop in a storytelling session. Now, stories must involve interactions. When I say interactions, it means that you should ask a child questions, as I said. You should let the child predict. You should let the child answer the questions, without any fear. Now, this will also help you in understanding if the child is following the story or not. This will also help you understanding if the child is connected with the story, if the child is comprehending the story, if the child has connected with the characters, if the child has even understood what the setting is all about, right? So have a lot of interactions, especially after the story. Have a question and answer session where you ask children about what the story was all about. Or maybe after an important sequence, you want to take a pause and ask questions. That is also welcome. You can involve the children after the sequence also and ask questions to them and allow them to answer. Now, maintain eye contact, especially if you're reading a story from a storybook. So there are a lot of times when reading a story, you look less at the children and more at the storybook. Now, that's not a good way. That's not an effective way to tell a story. The idea here is that you do your rehearsals with the storybook at least 3 to 4 times prior to telling the story to the children, prior to holding the storytelling session. It's very important so that you know the text by heart, or at least the basic text, the basic words, and then you can form sentences and tell the story to the children or read out the story to the children. But don't keep your eyes fixed on the storybook and not on the children. This will not interest the children at all. Your storytelling session will not be effective It will be a complete failure, I'm sorry to say so. And that's not the objective of a storytelling session. We have to make it interesting. We have to capture our audience. Your storytelling session should be very captivating, especially for the young listeners, for your young children. Allow the children to interrupt. It is so important. It is so important for the children to interrupt the story because they want to show their excitement, and we should allow them to do so because we don't want to kill their interest. We don't want to kill their excitement, their amazement at listening to the story. We want to inculcate that excitement in them. We want to boost that excitement and that interest in those children. So allow them to interrupt you, or allow them to come and touch the storybook. Let them have that feel, that tactile experience, the joy of touching a character in the story. Let them do that. It's very cathartic. It's very satisfying for the children. So please make it a point that if a child is interrupting you during a storytelling session, you answer the question. You don't shun the child. Also, allow the children to physically participate in the story. Now, when you're telling the story, a story may have a lot of physical movements. Like maybe a movement where the children are required to jump, or the character is jumping, so you allow the children to jump. Or the Three Little Pigs, where he was blowing away the houses. So allow the children to do that. Or Goldilocks, who was sleeping on the bed. So allow the children to go to sleep symbolically, but allow them. Give them those kind of physical movements. Let them participate physically, in the story. So when I say physically, I mean the movements, the physical movements. Let them do that. It's very important because again, through this, children will be connected to the story. They will be more invested in the story. They will enjoy the story more. And that is what is our objective of doing a storytelling session with our children, isn't it? So keep these points in mind when you are doing a story with your children. Also, allow the children to repeat the story after you've done your storytelling session. So what you can do is to really make your storytelling session interesting is to call 2-3 children after a storytelling session and ask them to repeat the story. Now, this will also help you as educators to understand if children have followed the story, if they know the characters, and how much they remember and how much they can recall. So let them enact the story. This will also enhance their communication skills. This will also increase their confidence. Right? So these are a few tips which you can actually use while you're doing a storytelling session. And I hope these tips are useful to you in some way or the other. Thank you.